As they say, we've hit a dead end. Russian President Vladimir Putin has publicly admitted that there is a collapse in the Russian economy. Moreover, today Putin officially stated for the first time that there is a high risk of Russia losing its sovereignty. And here is a quote from Putin. Russia may lose its sovereignty if it buys everything with oil and gas revenues under the sanctions that are trying to cut off its hydrocarbon exports. In fact, Putin admitted that Russia is just a big gas station, and Western sanctions against the oil and gas sector are actually destroying this gas station. And right on time, Europe stepped in with new sanctions. The new European Union sanctions, which include a flexible price cap on Russian oil, could deprive the Russian budget of every fifth ruble of planned oil and gas revenues. And that's almost $20 billion this year. In addition, the European Union and Britain have launched a real hunt for the Russian oil shadow fleet. Moreover, the European Union started targeting Russia's allies in this matter from afar because the European Union imposed sanctions against an Iranian oil tycoon who was helping Putin illegally trade oil. We'll now discuss this topic in detail. I'm Alexei Pechi, and today is July 21st. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, leave any comment you want, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, before I quote Putin about Russia losing its sovereignty, I'll share some news about European oil sanctions. According to experts, the new European Union sanctions, which include a flexible price cap on Russian oil, could deprive the Russian budget of every fifth ruble of Russia's planned oil and gas revenues. According to analysts, due to the new price cap mechanism, which will now be set 15% below average market prices, the Russian treasury will fall short, 1.5 trillion rubles in raw material taxes annually. That's about 18% of the amount that the Russian Ministry of Finance planned to collect this year. As analysts claim, quote, this measure can significantly pressure the Russian economy, particularly federal budget revenues. The risks are heightened by the fact that the country still heavily depends on raw material revenues. And most of the oil is exported to countries where the price cap can be enforced by restricting access to insurance, logistics, and financial settlements. The key phrase in this quote was that Russia still heavily depends on raw material revenues. And that's what Putin talked about today. But we'll get to that later. The oil price cap introduced at the end of 2022 was set at $60 per barrel, at a higher price. So-called black gold from Russia was banned from being transported on Western tankers and insured by Western financial institutions. The new cap, according to the decision of the European Commission, will be $47.60 per barrel of oil for now, and its next review will take place in 3 months. And so every 3 months they will look at the average market price, subtract 15% from it, and that will be the price cap for Russian oil for the next 3 months. In June, the Russian Urals grade was sold abroad at an average of $59.8 per barrel. But due to European Union sanctions, the price of Russian oil can drop in some cases to as low as $45, considering logistical and political discounts. Well, political discounts, you understand, are for China and India because there they manage to get simply incredible discounts. This will lead to a further decrease in foreign currency revenues and increase fiscal pressure on the Russian economy. Russia's oil and gas budget revenues are already falling rapidly. At the end of the first half of the year, they were 14% lower than last year, and in May and June, the year-on-year decline exceeded 30%. As a result, over 6 months, a 4 trillion ruble hole has formed in the treasury. This is 6 times more than in the same period of 2024. Lowering the oil price cap could become the most serious problem for Russian oil exports since the introduction of the European embargo at the end of 2022. And here's what it's all about. The thing is, in recent months, the price of Russian Urals oil has stayed below the cap of $59.8 per barrel. The cap is $60, so it's literally just 20 cents lower. And in fact, because of this gap, Greek shipping companies started actively transporting this oil. So officially, Greece calmly started trading and transporting Russian oil. Well, because it doesn't exceed the price cap, so it seems like there are no violations. Because of the lowered price cap, these transporters will refuse Russian oil again. But replacing them with enough ships from the shadow fleet might not work anymore, because almost 500 tankers are already under sanctions. The British decided not to wait and imposed sanctions against two companies connected to Russia, a shipping company and an oil trader. London added 135 tankers to the sanctions list, which are part of the shadow fleet responsible for illegally transporting cargo worth $24 billion since the beginning of 2024. Basically, this was a signal to the whole world, to everyone in the world who deals with Russians, that they will come after you too. So in fact, this news is important because the British have started to impose sanctions not just there. Russian companies, or rather companies that seem very distant but in one way or another help Russia export this oil. The European Union has also started to go far, and catch Russian partners red-handed who seem to be farther away from Russia. And so the European Union added Hossein to the sanctions list. Shamkhani is a well-known Iranian oil trader and the son of one of the closest advisors to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The reason for this was his role in trading Russian oil and his involvement in the logistics of the so-called shadow fleet. Along with him, his Dubai-based companies Admiral Grob and Milovus Grob were also sanctioned. And this was truly an important blow. The fact is, Shamkhani's network has become one of the largest operators in the Russian and Iranian oil export market. Shamkhani launched an entire network of hedge funds with offices in London, Dubai and Geneva to launder Russian money from the shadow sale of oil. He also coordinated the activities of dozens and dozens of ships under the flags of Liberia and Panama that were part of Russia's shadow fleet. Now he has been taken down by the European Union. And against the backdrop of such news, even the Russian dictator Putin stated that Russia could lose its sovereignty if it buys everything with oil and gas revenues under the sanctions that are trying to cut off its hydrocarbon exports. Next, I will quote the Russian dictator Putin, which surprisingly will be pleasant to your ears. Quote, "If we buy everything with oil and gas, and now the situation is that they are trying to cut off both our oil and gas, then Russia will simply lose its competitiveness, and with it, its sovereignty." And then Putin went on to reflect that even back in the 1990s, there was an opinion that Russia shouldn't try to develop its own production of goods it didn't know how to make and still doesn't, for example, cars. And instead, to buy all of this abroad. However, there is another side to this approach, says Putin. While some countries produce, others consume. And there are a lot of goods that can be discussed in this context. But in fact, Russia is just a gas station. Everyone has been saying this for a long time, and finally Putin said it too. It's just a gas station that can't produce anything on its own. And it's funny that Putin said this in an interview on the Russia One television channel to that propagandist Zarubin. And it's funny that Putin in this interview recalls how he personally, back in 2018, set himself the goal of increasing exports from Russia by 66%. Anything except oil and gas. According to Putin's plan, by 2024, non-raw material, non-energy exports were supposed to increase from $150 billion to $250 billion per year. In reality, instead of growing, these exports decreased. Last year, it was $145 billion, the lowest in the past 7 years. And the sharp decline began after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the introduction of Western sanctions. It dropped by 25%. And overall, according to the Federal Customs Service, last year mineral and raw materials accounted for 61% of Russian goods exports. And now Europe has started to seriously strangle Russia's oil sector. And Putin complains that at this rate, Russia will soon lose its sovereignty. That's a wonderful trend, in my opinion. Let's keep things moving in that direction. I'll leave it at that. Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like the video. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye, everyone. Subtitles created by